Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 230. Pretty Dulcie. Part 1. Tosca de Marquis was one of the many aliases Dulcie May Markham used in her lifetime. The newspapers also nicknamed her Pretty Dulcie. Dulcie was born in the inner city Sydney suburb of Surrey Hills on the 27th of February 1914 to William Henry Markham, known as John, and Florence Millicent Parker. Her mother, Florence Parker, was born in Brunswick, Victoria. Her father, George Sylvester Parker, was born in Port Adelaide, South Australia, and he married Cornelia Donovan in Port Adelaide in 1882. They moved to Victoria by 1888, when Cornelia and George were charged with having received a quantity of goods, the property of Emil Jules Richten, knowing them to have been stolen. On the 11th of January 1888 in the Melbourne Age, a painful situation, a married couple charged with housebreaking. A painful spectacle was witnessed at the Kew Court this morning when a young married man named George Parker, along with his wife Cornelia, a rather prepossessing young woman and a mother of 2 little children, were placed in the prisoner's dock, the former on a charge of receiving stolen property and the latter for breaking into and stealing from the dwelling of Emil Jules Richten. Sergeant McGrath said it was an extremely sad sight to witness both husband and wife together in the prisoner's dock, more especially as the wife was wholly responsible for it. The police had only charged the husband with having received the stolen property from his wife, but it was his desire to shield her, and therefore he was prepared to plead guilty to both charges. If the bench was satisfied with this, he was informed that they could deal with the husband on both charges. Dr. Embling asked, "Is it a wise policy to let her go free if she is guilty? We do have to do justice, and that is all." The male prisoner responded, "I plead guilty to the 2 offences. My wife has nothing more to do with it." The facts of the case were related to the bench by Sergeant McGrath. It appears that the accused had been on friendly and visiting terms with the prosecutor, who carries on a business as a carpenter and joiner in Bulleen Road. Recently, Emil Richten called on the residents of the Parkers in Collingwood, and in the course of a conversation he mentioned that his wife had gone away to Adelaide and that he himself would be absent from home on the following day. He did have occasion to leave home in company with a friend, and on his return he found that the house had been broken into, ransacked, and property stolen to the value of several pounds. The missing articles comprised of a watch and chain, a silver pin, a razor, boots, and a gold ring. In consequence of the information he received about the robbery, he caused a warrant to be issued for the arrest of Mrs. Parker. On the morning of the day of the alleged offence, the female prisoner called at the shop of Mrs. Trail near the prosecutor's house and had a glass of cider-aid. She was carrying a baby about 18 months old. On leaving the shop, she went away in the direction of Richten's premises and again returned when she stated that she had a number of fowls for sale and that she lived in a house occupied by Constable King. The goods were pawned by the male prisoner, who got them from his wife at the shop of Dominic Mullaney in Fitzroy. The entrance was effected into the premises of Richten by raising the window with the aid of a tomahawk. The accused admitted the offences to the arresting constables Martin and King. The chairman announced that the bench, in consideration for the children, had decided under the circumstances to discharge the woman with a caution. The husband would be sent to jail for 1 week, as there was nothing against his previous character. However, 10 months later, on the 16th of October 1889, in the Victoria Police Gazette, Frederick Hendricken, alias George Parker, is charged on warrant with larceny as a bailee of a suite of furniture, a clock, a carpet and other articles from Abraham Nathan of Chapel Street, Prahran, in September. He's 25, 5 foot 8 inches high, dark complexion, dark hair, dark moustache only, with blue eyes. The property was bought on time payment and the offender disposed of it in Brunswick before he'd paid the complainant for it. It is supposed the offender has gone to his mother, who keeps a restaurant in Port Adelaide. And then on February the 1st, 1893, in the South Australian Police Gazette, George Parker, a painter, aged 29, 5 foot 7 inches high, fair complexion with dark brown hair and fair moustache only, full grey eyes, has a scar close to right eye and his nose has been broken for leaving without adequate means of support for his wife Cornelia Parker and their 4 children at Adelaide on the 21st of January. And again in the New South Wales Police Gazette in May 1893 at Newtown. A warrant's been issued by the Newtown bench for the arrest of George Parker, charged with wife desertion. He's 30 years of age, 5 foot 8 or 9 inches high, slight build, brown hair, fair moustache, otherwise clean shaved, a slight crook in the nose, dressed in a black sack coat, blue trousers and a light brown boxer hat, a painter, a native of Adelaide and may go to the country. Complainant is Cornelia Parker of Erskineville. In 1900, when Dulcie's mother, Florence, known as Florrie, was 7, she was withdrawn from a school at Kalgoorlie and enrolled in Adelaide. By 1902, they'd moved to New South Wales. On the 14th of January 1908 in the Sydney Morning Herald, shoplifting. Before Mr Love at the Water Police Court yesterday, George Parker, 44, a painter, was charged with stealing on the 8th of January a serge skirt of the value of 9 shillings and 11 pence, the property of Mrs McCarthy of Pitt Street, Sydney. Jenny Voigt, an employee of Mrs McCarthy's, stated that on Wednesday last the accused was in the showroom and was seen to take a skirt off a table and put it under his coat. He had a little girl with him and he stood by while she paid for something. The witness waited and watched until the manager came, whereupon the accused took the skirt from under his coat and threw it down. The accused, who offered no evidence, was sentenced to 3 months' imprisonment with hard labour. On the 15th of March 1908, so only 2 months later, Florrie was reported as missing at Woollahra in New South Wales. She was employed as a domestic servant by Reginald Sullivan. Florrie was 14, 5 foot high, fairly big for her age, dark hair, fat face, dressed in blue or white linen dress. On the 14th of May 1909, she was placed into foster care with Mrs Margaret Maloney of Mossman when she was 15 and a half. She absconded on the 19th of October until the 8th of November. She was then sent to the St Magdalene's retreat at Tempe, and on the 25th of January 1911 she absconded from there at the age of 16. Her description said tall for age, thin build, fair complexion and hair. She'd absconded with Gertrude Smith, that was also 16. In June 1911 she was convicted at the Central Police Court in Sydney, possibly on a vagrancy charge. She was given the option of going back to the St Magdalene's Female Centre in Buckingham Street, Surrey Hills, or go to jail. She chose the refuge and again ran away. On the 6th of September 1911, she was charged with being idle and disorderly in the Central Police Court in Sydney. After running away twice from St Magdalene's Convent, refuge for females, Florence was brought again before the courts. Neither of her parents knew where she'd been living. On the 19th of September 1911, she was charged with theft at the Glebe Police Court. She was charged with stealing a quantity of clothing in a carry-all basket valued at £2 and 10 shillings, the property of Charles Rose at Glebe, on the 1st of September. She received 1 month's hard labour, but was put on a good behaviour bond for 12 months. She then married Dulcie's father, John Markham, on the 28th of January 1913 in Waterloo, New South Wales, when she was 19 and John was 20. So Dulcie's family history shows that there is certainly a level of criminality going on. Dulcie was born in February 1914, and it seems that they moved to Western Australia not long after her birth. On the 6th of October 1914 in the Kalgoorlie Western Argus, it mentions that Mrs Florence Markham has put in an application for a boarding house licence. Dulcie's parents divorced in the mid-1920s. By the late 1920s, it was known that Dulcie was a prostitute, and she became Sydney's most extravagant gangster's girlfriend by the time she was 18. She was attracted to and associated with many major criminals of the 1930s, 40s and 50s. She was also closely involved in what was known as Sydney's Razor Gang in an era of organised crime. During Dulcie's criminal career, she amassed 100 convictions in New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland and Western Australia for prostitution, vagrancy, consorting, assaulting police, assaulting the public, keeping a brothel, drunkenness and drink driving. Dulcie was known in the media by many names, some being the Angel of Death, the Black Widow, Pretty Dulcie, Australia's Most Beautiful Bad Woman, Bad Luck Doll and One Way Ticket, due to 8 of her lovers either being shot or stabbed to death. She also went by aliases Tosca de Marquise, Tosca de Marine, Mary Eugene, Mary Bowen, and Dulcie Williams. Dulcie was described as a beautiful platinum blonde with an innocent face and baby blue eyes, with a ravishing figure, tall, curvaceous, slim-ankled and creamy complexioned. She was a glamour girl, attractive even to a husky voice. She was a standout beauty, and she used her Hollywood looks to lure her punters and dazzle her lovers, of which she had many. As she herself told newspaper reporters in 1940, "I was pert, more than ordinarily pretty, and fellows took a lot of notice of me." The Daily Mirror summed up her career. Dulcie Markham saw more violence and death than any other woman in Australia's history. On the 6th of October 1930, at the age of 16, she was reported as missing. The newspaper at the time stated that 408 women had been reported to the police as missing. Of that number, 34 of them were unaccounted for. And included in the 34 that are still being sought is Dulcie Markham, 16 years old. She used the name Mary Eugene on the 8th of March 1931 when she fronted Sydney Central Court. It says the zip and tang of the country's fresh air will replace the artificial bloom on Mary Eugene's cheeks with a nice natural rosy red, and up where the balmy breezes blow over orange, if her full pouting lips aren't so heavily carmined, well, nobody'll notice that. In her way, Mary presented a pretty picture as she stood outside the dock at the Central Police Court one day last week, a fur coat doing much to hide the fashionable clothes that clung to her dainty figure. But when a matter-of-fact police sergeant described her as an idle and disorderly person, one sort of tumbled out of the clouds. Mary told Sergeant Hart that she was prepared to go to her people in Orange and keep off the streets. "You know where you'll go, don't you?" said Mr. McDougall, SM, addressing the young lady. "As sure as the sun rises, you'll end up with the Chinaman, right down to the very depths amongst the filth. Now, you clear out to Orange, it's a nice, clean place." Mary was remanded for a week in order to allow her to clear out. However, only a few months later, in May 1931, she's recorded as living at Haymarket, Sydney, with Alfred John Dillon and his mother. Dulcie, though, left this address not long after. On the 13th of May 1931 in William Street, Sydney, a stall-keeper, Alfred Dillon, and 21-year-old Cecil Scotty McCormack came to blows over the attentions of Markham, resulting in Dillon stabbing McCormack to death. She was present at the time. Dulcie and Scotty McCormack were planning to marry. Scotty had only just been released from Long Bay Jail. Her appearance at the coronial inquest into Scotty McCormack's death the following month was her first public appearance as a member of Sydney's underworld. She dressed in a blood-red dress and hat. She had perfectly styled blonde hair and ruby lips, and there was no escaping her resulting persona. To the city's pressmen, at least, this woman was the classic femme fatale. In June 1931 in Fitzroy, Victoria, she was arrested for having insufficient means of support, a charge that could be applied for any suspect living off illegal earnings. In June 1933, she fronted the City Court in Melbourne, and the Melbourne Herald said, "Mr. Bond said that Dulcie Markham, a young woman who was charged with vagrancy and arrested on the 17th of June, was remanded until the 27th of June on £50 bail." A month later, the Sydney Truth exposed Mary Eugene as being Dulcie Markham. On the 16th of July, it says, "Melbourne's Miss Markham is identical with Sydney's Miss Eugene. In other words, Miss Eugene, who is as well known to a lot of Sydney policemen as the numbers on their uniforms, is officially known as Miss Markham to the Melbourne Constabulary." In November 1933 in Fitzroy, Victoria, Henrietta Gwynn was charged with having committed willful and corrupt perjury in giving sureties for bail of £20 for Dulcie Markham, who's been charged with having an insufficient means of support by showing a stolen bank book with a credit of £24. Dulcie married a sideshow worker and a small-time mobster, Frank Clinch Bowen, in Brisbane on the 4th of March 1936. They married at the home of a Methodist minister and stated that their residence was in Grey Street, South Brisbane. He listed his occupation as a salesman and hers as a domestic. Bowen was already married. He married Elizabeth Berkelman in New South Wales in 1935. In less than 4 weeks after her marriage, on the 28th of March 1936 in Brisbane, Dulcie Bowen, 21, housewife, pled guilty in the police court today of 3 charges. On the 27th of March, she was found drunk in Albert Street using obscene language, and at the City Watch House, she willfully and unlawfully destroyed a cell bucket. She was sentenced to 25 hours jail.
2 months later, Dulcie was in court accused of falsifying a telegram on behalf of her new husband. On the 22nd of May 1936, in the Brisbane Telegraph, girl on charge of sending illegal telegram, use of Under-Secretary's title alleged. Dulcie Bowen, 22, appeared on remand in the City Police Court before Mr F. Byrne, Police Magistrate today, charged with delivering on the 22nd of April to an employee of the Postmaster General's Department for the purpose of being transmitted as a telegram this message. J. Lewis, Kingaroy, P.O. Showman permit issued, roll down, 22nd to the 28th of April, under Secretary of Justice. This was without the consent of George Arthur Carter, Under Secretary of the Department of Justice in Brisbane, and it purported to be the Under Secretary, Department of Justice. Through her solicitor, the defendant pleaded not guilty. Ernest Fletcher, Senior Postal Investigation Officer in the Postmaster General's Department, said that on the 24th of April he went to the City Watch House where he saw the defendant. He handed the telegram over to the constable who questioned her concerning the sending of the telegram. The writing on the back looks different from that on the front, the constable told her. I may have written those on the back in a hurry, she replied. The constable produced a piece of paper and said, will you write on it? The defendant replied, I can't. I will have to see my solicitor first. To this, the constable replied that it did not matter much. The witness took possession of the telegram again and left the watch house. Mr Gilbert asked, did you see any necessity for the constables wanting to get her handwriting if she'd already admitted writing on the front? The witness said he may have wanted to confirm the handwriting. Plainclothes Constable Cronos said that at 8:40pm on the 23rd of April he interviewed the defendant at the City Watch House. She admitted she'd sent the telegram. A man named Jim Lewis met me in Queen Street near Edward Street at 4 o'clock last Monday afternoon and asked me to send the telegram. Who is this man Lewis? The witness asked the defendant, and she replied, he is a showman. I often met him at shows. Lewis had the words written out on a piece of paper and I wrote the telegram in the police office. The defendant also said, according to witness, I handed the telegram to the man behind the counter and he handed it back to me and to be endorsed on the back. So I wrote my name and address on the back. It cost me $1, but Lewis gave me $2 to post it. Witness asked her, did you sign the name Under Secretary of Justice on that telegram? And he alleged she replied, yes, I just copied it off the note I got from Lewis. She admitted that she had got no authority to send the telegram. Witness then said, you have been at shows long enough to know that you had no right to send a bogus telegram and that the man Lewis was evidently going to run a roll-down game at the Kingaroy show without a permit and use your telegram as a permit. Surely you were suspicious when Lewis approached you. Defendant replied, no, dinkum, I did not know. I never gave it a thought. Reginald James Poulter, the employee of the telegram section to whom the telegram was alleged to have been given, said that at 1:30pm on the 22nd of April, the defendant came to the counter. After they had been at the writing desk, one or the other, he could not be certain which, presented him with a telegram. It was not endorsed. He handed it over again, saying that the signature and address of the sender had to be on the back. One of them took it, and they both went back to the writing desk. Both returned, and the telegram was again handed over. It was paid for, and the telegram transmitted. The witness was not altogether satisfied and laid a complaint. The magistrate asked, do you handle many telegrams from the Under Secretary Department of Justice? And the witness said, quite a few. Are they like that one? He said they are usually typed. Mr Gilbert then asked for the defendant's discharge on the grounds that there was no evidence of knowledge or of the want of authority. She did not then know that the message being sent was without authority. Detective Sergeant Brannerley said, defendant is over the age of 21 and she knows right from wrong. She must have known there was something wrong when a man hands her a telegram and says, here is $2, send me a telegram to myself at Kingaroy tomorrow. The magistrate said she must have known that in the course of ordinary business, the Under Secretary would hardly communicate a permit of that description on a piece of paper. The case was adjourned. And on the 24th of May 1936 in the Brisbane Truth, in another article it says the mysterious Mr Lewis, fake wire, signed by Under Secretary, wasn't official. A platinum blonde with deep blue eyes and a bride of 2 months, 20-year-old Dulcie Bowen, feelingly denied last week that she impersonated the Under Secretary for Justice and sent a bogus telegram in his name. Flickering her long eyelashes, holding her hands before her with her manicured fingernails artistically poised, she endeavoured to convince her listeners that she had no interest in a sideshow at Kingaroy and was not anxious to fix a permit for the mysterious character known as Jim Lewis. While admitting she'd been known by a couple of different names and had been convicted for consorting with criminals, offensive behaviour, and knocking a defenceless watchhouse bucket out of shape, Dulcie denied that she'd sent a phony wire from the GPO. The court was convinced that Dulcie had rigged a permit for the Kingaroy sideshow and therefore she must pay the penalty. She'd been audacious enough to think she could use the Undersecretary Carter's name and get away with it. Now, however, she knows differently. Dulcie is tall, slim, has a wealth of blonde curls and knows how to exploit her charms. She is also accomplished in the art of putting over a tall story. Only now at the age of 20, Dulcie Bowen has a rather lengthy list of offences. She was candid in admitting her record from the witness box in court. In her young life, it was revealed that she'd accumulated a couple of aliases and fallen foul of the police in 2 states. 2 months ago, Dulcie met and fell in love with a young showman named Frank Bowen and changed her name again, but this time it was for the sake of romance. She and her youthful husband are now residents of Brisbane. Following the laying of a charge against her in the Brisbane Police Court, Dulcie Bowen didn't appear on one occasion when her name was called and the police hunt for her began. She was found in hospital with a painful head wound and admitted under cross-examination last week that her non-appearance to answer the charge was because she'd been struck with a bottle. Chrono asked, "Are you sure there is a man named J. Lewis?" She said yes. "Sure it's not a man taking the name of Lewis and running a roll-down show on your permit?" She said J. Lewis is his correct name. He said, "Your husband is up at the Kingaroy show. Would he be going under the name of Lewis?" And Dulcie said no. On the following morning, Bowen was shown the telegram and said it was her writing on both the front and the back of the form. Mr. Gilbert, cross-examining, said, "Did this girl tell you that she knew Lewis and had seen him at shows operating on a permit?" "Yes." "Did she tell you that Lewis gave her the actual document to send?" "No." "Did you believe her when she said she wrote on the front and the back of the telegram?" And the policeman said, "I was a bit doubtful." The blonde's own story was vastly different from the version the court subsequently decided that she'd given to plainclothes Croneau. In fact, she denied most of what Croneau declared she said. Dulcie started off by saying that there is certainly a man that's named J. Lewis. He's no figment of her imagination because she actually knows him and has seen him working on various showgrounds. On the afternoon, the 22nd of April, she ran into Lewis in Queen Street. He said, "Hello, Dulce," and they talked on show business for quite a time. Lewis, she claimed, handed her a telegram already written out and asked her to send it for him from the GPO. It was folded and she did not read it. She did as she was asked. She went on and sent the telegram for her friend after endorsing her name to it. Lewis gave her 2 shillings to cover the costs. Mr. Gilbert asked, "The front of the telegram wasn't written by you?" And she said no. "And you didn't read it?" "No." "When did you first know its contents?" She said, "When I was arrested and questioned about it." "Did you know it was a false wire?" She said no. Bowen completely denied her conversation with Croneau and said that she never confessed to writing the telegram herself. The prosecutor, Brunelly, said, "So then, Mrs. Bowen, you are asking this court to assume that Constable Croneau was committing perjury?" She said, "Well, I'm telling the truth." "Do you know any reason why Croneau would perjure himself?" She said, "I'm sure I don't." She explained that her husband's name was Frank Bowen. He was a showman and at different times she had gone touring the country shows with him. Brunelly asked, "Have you seen Lewis since this incident?" She said, "I tried to get in touch with him and inquire of his whereabouts from various showmen." "Did your husband see anything of Lewis at Kingaroy?" "I don't know." "You have other names?" "Yes." "Dulcie Markham and Mary Eugene?" "Yes." "Where do you come from originally?" "New South Wales." "Ever convicted there for consorting with habitual criminals?" "Yes." "For offensive behaviour too?" "Yes." Bowen admitted she was recently in Melbourne and came to Queensland with her husband. In Brisbane, she confessed she had been convicted of destroying a cell bucket and for being in possession of stolen property. But after an extraordinary story had been told, she was found guilty of dispatching a bogus telegram and was fined £10 in default imprisonment for 3 months by the police magistrate Byrne. "I was nearly sending you to jail," Mr. Byrne told her. On the 31st of August 1936, in the Sydney Labour Daily, Falling through a glass door of a building in William Street City on Saturday, Mary Eugene, 21, of Greens Park Road, Paddington, severed an artery in her leg. She was operated on at Sydney Hospital. Around this time, Dulcie met Arthur Kingsley Taplin, who was 23. Dulcie shifted to Melbourne with him, and Arthur now was her lover and her pimp. Arthur Taplin was drinking in the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Swanston Street, Melbourne, on the 15th of December 1937 when there was a brawl. He was shot and died 7 days later. On the 24th of December 1937, in the newspaper it states, relatives and friends of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Taplin, Thelma and Dulcie Taplin are invited to attend the funeral of their dearly loved son, brother, grandson and friend, Arthur Kingsley Taplin. That was sent from Paddington, New South Wales. And on the 26th of December 1937 in the Brisbane Truth, police seek mystery blonde, may be able to throw light on killing well known in Brisbane. Tangled in the tragic threads of the latest silent crime of gangland, the sensational daylight shooting and killing of a well-known Sydney underworld character, Arthur Kingsley Taplin, in the bar of a Melbourne hotel, is the name of a girl familiar to the police of Brisbane, who never seems to be able to avoid having the questioning finger of notoriety placed on her movements. Southern investigators consider that beautiful Dulcie Eugene might be able to throw some light on the crime that has cost Taplin his life, for according to them, the girl was one of his closest associates, although at the moment her whereabouts are proving to be one of the greatest problems they've encountered in connection with this latest gangster outbreak. Thus, as has not been infrequent throughout her remarkable young life, does the spotlight swing again in the direction of the girl who not inaptly has been termed Australia's most beautiful bad woman. Dulcie, or Mary Eugene, or to use another name by which she is known, Mary Markham, or still another, Dulcie Bowen, hers by right of marriage, has two claims to doubtful distinction. She was prominently involved in a Sydney underworld feud with Scotty McCormack, which put on the spot some years ago, and in Melbourne on another occasion, she perpetrated the most audacious hoax at the expense of the law that is known to police court history. On that occasion, as Mary Markham, a petite and demure brunette, the striking contrast to the devastating blonde of Sydney streets, she presented herself to the magistrate and justice of the peace at the City Court as a rather badly done by young girl whose appearance, for the first time, in such surroundings could hardly be attributed to any fault of hers. A strong plea made on her behalf by the late Mr. Sonnenberg, of the most forceful criminal lawyers Melbourne has known, had its effect on the bench, and after conferring, the judge, whose sympathy had obviously been aroused by the girl's predicament, decided to stand the case over for a month. This was to give Miss Markham an opportunity to carry out her undertaking made to a Salvation Army official to return to Sydney in that time if she made good. With a forlorn smile for the members of the bench who had been kind to her, Dulcie stepped down from the dock and went on her way. She then vanished, and the girl, who claimed to have never before been inside a court, had quite probably been inside them on more occasions than the justices thought. She had pulled the wool over the eyes of the law. Eugene, or Markham, or Bowen, had previously bathed in deep waters of notoriety at the time when the killing of Scotty McCormack in Sydney had created an underworld stir of major proportions. Scotty was not a very nice fellow, and a surprisingly large number of people found it impossible to be mournful when it was learnt that his lifeless body had tumbled out of a darkened doorway of a William Street building with the point of a long, slim lawyer's bodkin pushed neatly through his heart. Mary Eugene, however, did not stand with the majority then. She grieved over Scotty's untimely ending, and throughout the resultant investigation figured largely as a mysterious, beautiful, golden-haired girl of the underworld. The girl was regarded as a motive for McCormack's killing, jealousy and hatred of Scotty by youthful Alfred John Dillon. The girl herself denied this. Later, after Dillon was convicted of the killing and sent to jail for 13 years, she declared that he had meant nothing in her life and that Scotty McCormack, the victim of the strangest dumb tragedy in criminal history, had been exclusively her man. Life for this modern Messalina of the streets continued along with its strange ways. Incidents, sometimes bizarre and unusual, arose to crowd a career that really began on a theatrical stage at 7 and continues to this day to weave a pattern of existence weird and out of the ordinary. At 14, Dulcie deserted the stage, where if in no way wealth than in experience. Understanding something perhaps of the preference of gentlemen, she changed her chestnut looks to a rich, almost golden white, and journeyed along the highways of this continent's cities in search of riches. She traded on her looks, for from her childhood she possessed an undeniable beauty, bold and striking, and her figure, the grace of her carriage, and the clothes with which she adorned herself were attractions which many a Lothario could find difficult to resist. The Mary Eugene of Sydney, Melbourne's Dulcie Markham, and to Brisbane, Dulcie Bowen. It was under that name sometime in 1936 that this strange feminine character again broke into the headlines, once more to reveal herself in a daring light, audaciously breaking a lance with the law. With a consummate disregard for the consequences, she impersonated none other than a high state official of the Department of Justice. On this occasion, however, in contrast to her Melbourne court appearance, there was no attempt to mislead justice, and Dulcie, with many a flicker of her mascaraed lashes and gestures of hands with their effectively polished fingernails, admitted to her aliases, her convictions, and her varied wrongdoings. And now once again she's come back into the news with the desire of Melbourne detectives to interview her in connection with the violent death of Taplin. Just what information they think the girl might be in a position to give them, the authorities in the South have not divulged, but they do allege that the dead man was frequently in the company of the golden-haired adventuress, and they would like to find themselves in touch with her. Taplin, only a recent arrival in Melbourne from Sydney where he lived in Paddington, was shot down in dramatic circumstances at a Swanston Street hotel at which he'd secured employment as a barman. Previously, shortly after his arrival, he'd been picked up by watchful detectives and presented in court on a vagrancy charge. Unfortunately for himself, as it turned out, he was able to convince the bench that the charge lacked substance, and he turned loose to meet a violent and well-planned death. Working behind the bar with other employees at the hotel, he was shot through the stomach at close range, and later, although probably realising he was dying, he maintained the underworld code of silence and flatly refused the police any information that may have helped them. Whether such information as they think they may possess will help, in the event of investigators running across Dulcie Eugene or Markham or Bowen, is something that's not yet been disclosed. In part 2, I'll continue to tell you the life of Dulcie Markham. And yes, there's at least another man to go. So at the start of the next episode, we'll begin to talk about her next relationship.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.